Welcome to Architectural series titled Architects Talk or Conversations with Architects, sponsored by Kalebodur. Today we have a very distinguished guest, Mr. Eric Owen Moss. He is a well-known architect, both in global scale and in Turkey as well. He's an award-winning architect. Mr. Moss, welcome to Turkey.
Nice to be here.
And welcome to the series.
Thank you for having me.
I want to thank you for your precious time being with us. I hope you will enjoy the series. You are coming from States, but especially from California.
Yes.
Which is quite different. I'm in LA. Because when we look from here, it is always associated with freedom and creativity.
Yeah.
It is one of the centers. I'm maybe racing with New York or something like that. And most of the architects, especially the young ones, think that it is a privilege to work in LA. I mean, the architects coming from LA are working in privileged conditions, like
yes.
Clients who are transparent to creativity. Your limits for the project are always larger or flexible than the usual, etc. Is it true? I mean, is it the case?
Los Angeles is a special city, but not necessarily for those reasons. If you think philosophically about whether the place where you live or your work, most of the time, determines who you are, it's one thing. If you think the people in the place determine what the work is, it's something else. So this is an old philosophical discussion. Does the environment determine the content of the work, or do the people who do the work determine the content of the work? And to be honest, I would say that there have been a few unusual people in Los Angeles. And my sense would be I would prefer to give credit to the individuals rather than the context in which they work. And those people have produced, I think, some special work in Los Angeles. And there may also be a factor that has to do with the nature of the city itself. And the nature of the city itself, in juxtaposition with a city like your city, like Istanbul, which has history going back thousands of years. Los Angeles, if it has a history at all, it's 20 minutes.
Yeah, and you were defining it as infant, as far as I remember. You use the word infant, comparing with Istanbul or Beijing, right, or something.
Sure, it's a young city. It's a young city. So the Turkish architects who would like to work there should come there now, because I really think the future of Los Angeles is literally ahead of it, not behind it. And it's conceivable that a time would come when, you don't have to make a project next to Raphael's Palazzo in Los Angeles. There's no Raphael Palazzo. And therefore, the latitude to make different kinds of projects, or the obligations to pay attention to what's behind you, is not substantial, because there isn't a hell of a lot behind you anyway. Then it's up to the architect, and then you get some differences, but you get some unusual work too.
But you have to tackle with the problem of creating the context by yourself, maybe.
I think that's an interesting way to put it, because there's no a priori context that obligates you. Now, to be fair, there are all sorts of other kinds of pressures, probably not so different than yours. But I think, relatively speaking, Los Angeles would be a freer place to work than most major cities in the world. I think that's true.
But I again read somewhere that you said LA needed to stop worrying about emulating older, more traditional cities and embrace its fragmented nature, its ability to serve as an architectural laboratory. So it is also a kind of a alternative ground, a further chance.
It should be.
To try new things.
It should be, and in the hands of a few people, I think it is. And I think that also sets a precedent for other people who are coming now, coming younger architects. I think the point that I was making in that situation was that there are inevitably people who look around a little bit nervous, a little bit unsure, a little bit uncertain, and they see examples, Ringstrasse, Champs-Élysées, Rambla, Tiananmen Square, whatever it is, pieces of urbanity from historic cities that are famous, and they say, okay, we have to have one of those. We have to have our Champs-Élysées or something like that. And there have been, for instance, Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles, I think, there's a notion that it belongs to a kind of urban road where there are precedents around the world. So I think there are also pressures from people who want Los Angeles to grow up in a way that resembles other models in the world. I think this is difficult physiologically because of what Los Angeles is. Politically, there may be some constituency for that. So I think Los Angeles would be better, would be healthier if it acknowledged its opportunity to make things new and focused on that. I mean, they make a train through Los Angeles now. It's like a 19th century, it's not like Shanghai, Beijing train. It's a very slow train and follows a traditional train route, which was abandoned 50 years ago or something. So there are pressures to resemble models or precedents in other cities, which I think are not good pressures to respond to, but they exist in Los Angeles too.
Yes. But on the other hand, I mean, architecture in states in general, and of course LA, had a significant dominance in mainstream architecture. And as a student, when I was in university, we were educated with references to Frank Lloyd Wright, Flip Jansen, and many things that came from the new continent, I mean, as the modern architecture. And they were sometimes more dominant than, in terms of defining the contemporaneous, a sense of contemporaneous, they were more dominant than what we observe, what we see in our environment. So it is a kind of a, I mean, yes, there was no history or kind of a background, but I mean, there was a significant dominance in terms of, especially in modern architecture, coming from
I think
creating the heroes, for example. There was a capacity of continuously creating heroes, and it's a continuous case, I think.
I think America has a predilection in architecture for making heroes. I think we can do that. And you raise a very interesting point, particularly in the world today. I like the point, but maybe it's less an architecture discussion, more broadly a social and political discussion. What's America? What's America? And the architects you mentioned, Wright belongs to really probably to the 19th century, not even to the 20th century. Philip is another story, and conflating those two is a little bit complicated, because I think that for me their work means very different things. But I think Wright is an original American, a 19th century American, and the 19th century for America as a symbol to the world, to Europe and to Asia and to many places, as an opportunity which was a remarkable opportunity, that you could do things and make things and behave in a way that you probably couldn't do anywhere else in the world. I don't think that's entirely gone, but I think the perception of America in the world is somewhat different. Now, America in the world is not quite the same as American architecture in the world, which is not quite the same as Los Angeles architecture in America and the world. What I would say is, as an ideal, I think Los Angeles does have an opportunity in terms of heroes in architecture and making architecture new that was once a venue for America entirely. Mm-hmm. So I think Los Angeles has done that and continues to do that. And I think that's an important role that Los Angeles architecture can play. It's funny because I never thought of myself as an advocate for America per se, or an advocate for Los Angeles per se, or Los Angeles architecture. I'm probably an advocate for certain ideas or certain ways of thinking, and occasionally certain people, because I would say my collection of a few friends, maybe 5, 6 colleagues around the world, is a kind of metaphorical Los Angeles. That's true. And even though the people aren't always in Los Angeles, might be Prix in Vienna, might be Stephen Hall in New York, might be Tom Main in LA. You know, a few of us who get together and then go away and don't see each other for 6 months, even though we talk. So that's my redefinition of what Los Angeles architecture could be. I wanted to say one other thing. Philip Johnson, and have to say was very.
He used a definition for you, like jewel of junkyard. Do you remember that?
Yeah, with the first book we did with Rizzoli, he wrote the introduction, and he was very friendly and very supportive, and we always appreciated his, because in architecture you're trying to do things and you look for friends, and sometimes everybody is making faces, and he was helpful. But he did something which I think is back to your question about Los Angeles as an original versus Los Angeles as being obligated to models that belong, let's say, to Europe. We don't know what to do, let's do something like that. And Hitchcock and Johnson made a very well-known exhibition, Museum of Modern Art, in 1929, bringing European conceptual ideas. Could be De Stijl, could be constructivism, could be the Bauhaus guys, could be the futurist guys, bringing it to America. But so this is already, in a certain way, a kind of definition of an inferiority complex. Do your own work. Let Santalia do his work. Let Eric Mendelsohn do his work. Let the Athens Charter guys, we'll do our work. I think Los Angeles is a little bit like that in a way, not obligating itself to conceptual, to intellectual, to theoretical models. Oh, they know how to do it? Let's do it like they did it. Over the Atlantic Ocean, into the Museum of Modern Art. Now everybody discusses this, and in a sense, it made America, at an intellectual level, I think, sympathetic to, and I don't know if the word is inferior, but we should do that. That's where the new ideas are coming from Europe. So in a certain sense, modernism in America was imported from Europe, but they stripped away. For instance, the constructivists had an ideological premise, a philosophical, a historical premise, futurists, so on and so on. Bauhaus too. It became a style in America. So whatever political ideologies and associations, which are quite fascinating, you know. So Moses Ginsburg working in Russia, or Le Corbusier borrowing from Moses Ginsburg, by the time it wound up as a house in America, all the ideology was dropped in the Atlantic Ocean, and it became a series of images. So this is interesting, you know, whether the images, what images belong to what politics is a discussion. But when America imports, America leaves behind the social and political context out of which these movements in the early 20th century originated. That's what Johnson did. He made it a style.
Can we say that, I mean, there's a breaking point in 70s or 80s in terms of, I mean, what we are witnessing is a more American style of doing things and less pressure of European architecture in that terms, I mean, in that stylistic manner.
What?
I mean, if we come back to your philosophical definition of America, I mean, I always liked the Jean Baudelaire's definition of America, where he says, I mean, Americans created Las Vegas because they wanted all the people to believe what is rest is real. I mean, we can replace maybe LA and Hollywood with again Las Vegas. I don't know. So there's a significant transparency to virtual reality and freedom in that sense, which can be read as creativity on one hand, but virtual reality on the other.
Well, my opinion about I don't think I have a popular opinion about virtual reality, or I'm not sure what reality is in a philosophical sense, never mind in a personal sense. So I'm not sure how whatever that is becomes any more or less intelligible if it's virtual. As far as Las Vegas goes, I mean, without sounding too saintly, I don't want to sound particularly saintly. It was never a place that I admired. It's a pastiche of, you know, whether it's the Eiffel Tower or the Doge's Palace or whatever they make. And there's something about working in architecture, and you know this.
It's a frozen form of Hollywood, I think.
Yeah, but there are films that are, Kurosawa is a filmmaker, Fellini is a filmmaker. I mean, Hollywood movies, however powerful is their constituency, is not the only content in America. And there are people who look at that and who are disappointed in it.
Can it be compared to architecture, I mean, in a similar way? I mean, as you compare Fellini with Hollywood, for example.
I think the best architecture, I don't know about the film, music, architecture, literature, you know, that equation is for a more complicated or a different discussion. But I think the best architecture might be kinetic. It might move you. So even though it physiologically is static, but in an emotive sense, it moves you around. In that sense, which is a jump, it may have some relationship to film. And there are a lot of discussions now, we use this too, about the relationship of making animations in your office and using animations not in an illustrative way, not to show the client what it means to, but in a conceptual way, using animations as a part of
methodology of design.
That's right. And I think as a tool, now we have to see, does it really make something which innovates or changes the context of a discussion? So some of the tools, and maybe this is where you're going, some of the tools that filmmakers use or Hollywood uses are also intelligible tools to make architecture now. So even though the medium, the result is different, but the tools that are being applied may be similar. And this is also interesting because not so long ago they were considered quite different. So this might be a step. We have to see what all the talk leads to. But maybe this sort of kinetic sense of buildings from different, in other words, you don't understand it by standing here looking at the Arc de Triomphe or something like that. That the interrelationship between the constituency for architecture and the architecture, by moving it, you see it here, you see it here, you see it here, you see it here, and you begin to understand in a composite way, not in a kind of elevational way. You know what I mean? It's this, drawing perspectives and things like that. So a more complicated way of seeing and thinking might give a different kind of building typology. In that sense, filmmaking and architecture may have a relationship.
Yes, I think that's very significant. And in a way, I was just going to ask at the end of the day, I mean, if we can talk about an LA architecture, maybe this is this movement and I mean this flexibility, and which is ending up with non-typological arrangements or design can be the shared ground. Because when I look at Tom Mine's and Frank Gehry's architecture, there are significant continuities with what you are doing in terms of, I mean, forms, etc. But what I read when I look at your architecture, it is unique and different than the others in the way that they are not stylistic, but rather research-based, which is open to end up with different styles, if you call it style, I don't know, or as you have defined differences, let me define it like that. So in each project, I mean, it's not easy to estimate how it will end up. I don't know if...
Right, that's right. That's an interesting point. This would be a much better discussion if we were walking around a building and looking at it and talking about it. It's a little bit more difficult speaking to an audience in a very abstract way. But one point I think you're making, and I would say this is true of me. There are architects, and good architects, whose work you recognize in a certain sense.
That's true.
And my
it's
guess,
very easy to say which building is a
that's
Frank
right.
Gehry building.
And the client, Frank, the client comes and says, okay, give me one of these. I saw this in Barcelona. Yeah. I'd like to have one of these. And the architect says, okay, we give you one of those.
When they come to you, they are confused. What I'm trying to underline.
Well, I think the ideal, from my point of view, would be, and I think you said this, to start down the road without knowing exactly where the destination is. Not only that, going down the road without knowing the route. Okay? So when you and Suha and I are driving from the hotel, we could go this way, we could go this way, we could go this way. Not only that, maybe we'll have the event over here, over here, over here, like that. And I remember I used to drive to my office, and every day I tried to go a different way, you know, just for fun. And in the end, you know what happened? I said the same way again. So this is always the pressure to come back to a routine and to something that's more efficient or more recognizable, or you can expedite more readily. But what we make an effort to do is to discover what we want to make in the process of working on it. That doesn't mean there aren't initial ideas and concepts and strategies, but that the capability that you have in an intellectual way to turn your mind inside out and to work in a way that doesn't guarantee that everybody knows at the end, when you start, what the conclusion will be. So I think if this is your point, I think this would be great, but it's hard to do it.
I know that, I mean, because what I was trying to underline is that the process is as valuable or more valuable than the end product, at least at the beginning. I mean, once you obtain the end product, maybe it becomes...
Let me say something about because I think I heard you say something which is very valuable. Look, if somebody says, what is the objective? This prize, this commission, this book, this magazine, this dinner, this whatever it is, if you look at things that way, who acknowledged you? And it's not that people, you and I included, don't appreciate those kinds of acknowledgement. But in the day-to-day living of your life and working, what really counts, I think you're saying this, is the process with your team, with your colleagues, with your pals, of working through these. It's like an adventure. That's how you live your life, like an adventure, if you can, okay? It makes a lot of pains in the neck. It makes
true,
problems. You have people chasing you and complaining and so on. But there's an enormous satisfaction out of what is genuinely a process of interrogation, investigation, invention, discovery, whatever you want to call it. That's really where the life of an architect, or from my point of view, my own life, gets its meaning.
That's true. And vice versa, on the other way, I mean, depending upon a stylistic production is a reductionist way of handling things, I mean.
Yeah.
The end product has a kind of a guarantee at the beginning, maybe, or I mean, it always sells in the market, but I mean, you may not have that pleasure and research, and it also, I mean, it creates an obstacle to be innovative in that sense, to be open to research and new advantage.
I think that's right, and I think with certain clients, particularly large clients who tend to be a little bit more conservative for all the obvious reasons. And a bank comes to you, so we're making a very unusual high-rise building in Los Angeles now. The floors are different. It has no columns. It has no beams. It can't go through the building department because the codes that apply based on which it has to be checked. It was
twin towers, then it was reduced to one single tower.
Now it's one, and now we're starting to build it in April. And we've been working on this off and on for a number of years. But the banks and the owner is great. The owner's a man and a wife. They're fantastic people. But when it's a lot, so the project is. The project is a large project, and it's an expensive project. And when you put that kind of investment into the project, you want to know what's coming back.
That's true, yeah.
Maybe. So the pressure as projects get bigger to guarantee, if I come to you and I say, will you make this for me? I want to make sure that what you're making for me is something that is plausible, workable, and I can pay for it. And I would like to know that when we start, not hope that we get that at the end. But there's a range of possibilities. Some clients are very conservative, some clients are a little more open, some clients are interested in the content because of the content, some clients are interested in the content because they think the content is brandable, marketable, saleable. So there are a lot of different motives and a lot of different perspectives. And for us, we have to find people, and now we start to find people. It took us a long time, and I understand why. But we find people who have some sympathies that we can share and work together to solve the problems, moving a little bit into unknown territory when we can.
Actually, I mean, sustainability of a research-based project or getting into such adventures are deeply depending upon the scale of the project, as far as I understand. As the project becomes larger, I mean, the expectation of the client becomes more sensitive, maybe, let me use the word. And so, I mean, staying as a kind of a boutique office or a small office, staying away from becoming institutional, a very big office, for example, is creating a kind of an alternative ground or a freedom to make research sustainable in architecture. Is it the case?
I think that first I would say, and I think most...
You don't have a big...
No, we've never had more than 30 people.
Yeah,
we've never had more than 30 people. We have, I don't know, probably 22, 23 people now. And we sometimes work, if we work with the Chinese, we work with a design institute, so on and so on. I could imagine that it would be a little bit larger, but I don't think it's ever been, it needs to be this size and this size only. It seems to have gotten to a point where we can do what we need to do with the people we have. We'll see what happens next. It's looking like it might have to enlarge, so we'll see. But I do think there's something about the personal relationships to projects and project content that would probably be difficult if the office had 600 people. That would be a different kind of office, because then you're formatting, you're systematizing, your methodologic, your organizational strategy and your form language has to be organized, and I hand it to you, and I hand it to you, and I hand it to you, like that.
Process is no more a main issue then.
It's not as inventive and as personal and as free. But one thing I would say, the issue of large projects or small projects wouldn't necessarily be an issue of quality. So that and I think this is a lot of the interesting projects in the 20th century and even into the 21st have either been smaller, have been houses in some cases, and so on. So content is content, and the politics, the logistics, the money, the pressures are different in different cases, and maybe the pressures are a little bit more substantial with larger projects because from the client's point of view or the bank's point of view, there's more at stake. But I mean, if you're doing a project which is 10, 15, 20 million versus a project which is 200 million, I think it's certainly possible to do something remarkable at the smaller scale. I think it's important to understand, especially for young architects who are doing smaller projects, not necessarily to assume that you can remake the world's vision of architecture only by doing a new city. You know, that the smaller projects also are substantial. Could be.
That's true. But is there always a representative relation between the city and the architecture of the city? Because in LA, for example, what you were saying in one of your writings or interview, that LA does not represent the architecture of LA, or vice versa. Am I wrong, or something like that?
Well, you know, this is like Kurosawa's film Rashomon, where different people could answer plausibly in different ways. So, okay. But I would separate Los Angeles as a generic proposition with Hollywood, with the movies, with all of that, from a few architects who have done unusual work. I would also say that the unusual work in Los Angeles probably to some degree is facilitated by the lack of a history in the city, the lack of a durable history, and even more so the lack of density in the city. So Los Angeles is like this, you know, it just keeps going, and now it's doing this, actually. It's starting to fill in, and there's a lot of space to change density and so on. So I would like to separate every original piece of architecture from every city in which it originates, and to deal with the physiology and the content of the architect and the architecture without the city. Now, if you go and look at Bernini in Rome or something, so the equation is quite different than Moss in LA. You know, sometimes you're the outsider, sometimes you're the insider, but what's crucial is to maintain your own conceptual independence, either as an outsider or as an insider.
What happens in China when you go to China?
You know, Xi Jinping gave a speech, maybe you guys saw this, the last week or 10 days. He gave a speech and he said, no more funny business. No more,
I remember it.
You know, architects who can't do these things now are coming to China to do funny things.
No more an experimental field.
That's right. And it didn't appear that he was looking at that work as
Dubai is still like that.
Yeah, Dubai.
They haven't resisted.
Dubai is still a venue for that. So this is again the politicians arguing for a more conservative, historic-based way of seeing architecture and cities and people and so on. So the fact that Xi Jinping doesn't distinguish him from lots of other leaders in lots of other countries, because I think there is always, you guys have the same thing, America has the same thing, Russia, France, England, Italy, whatever it is, Japan, whoever I left out. And what we have to do is make sure that we have to understand that, we listen to it, and then we have to make sure that doesn't apply to us. That we don't want the tendency to homogenize architecture, to make it predictable, to make it related to a state history or precedents. We know those pressures exist. We just have to resist them. And I think in China, I mean, the day of coming into China and for Western architects and inventing buildings, I think that day might be coming to an end.
But you have ongoing projects.
We have two, one in a city called Kunming and another in Nanjing. Yeah, not Shenzhen, Nanjing.
Nanjing, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I mean, are you feel yourself in the same way that for example, you are designing in LA, or I mean, are there?
Well, the opportunities are different. What we're working on in Nanjing is actually a city. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's 4 cities tied together. and Xi Jinping is right in one sense, that there aren't too many places in the world that you and I know where those opportunities are available to come into a swamp. Here's a swamp. You mentioned Shenzhen. I mean, Shenzhen in the 1980s had what, 15, 20,000 people living there? It was a fishing village or something like that. True. And now look at it.
14 years they
became... Yeah, so the capacity of the Chinese, we were working for a while, it's on hold, we may do it again, in a place called Weihai, which is about an hour west of Seoul, in the southern area in China on the coast. And they're rebuilding the whole coastline. They're trying to make it a sort of Bahamas, Hawaii, you know, that kind of, well, we don't have one of those, let's make one of those. It's a little bit like Las Vegas.
That's true, yeah. In a way. I was just about to come to that point.
Yeah, no, it's make a dream. And you go there, they asked us to make a tower, like an icon for the Weihai, which really has a restaurant, has a little museum, but it's just a big thing flying in the air. And I think it's an interesting commission, but to look at it in a hard-headed way, it also makes the discussion more superficial. The pressures on an architect, site conditions, budget conditions, the prosaic things, not the philosophical things, also have a lot to do with the content of work. In a certain sense, somebody says, go do something, which really has nothing in it. Make an adventure. I think adventures probably improve with the intensity of the adventure. And the intensity has something to do with very different kinds of threats to what you want to do, or pressures on what you want to do. And I think in that particular project, there are relatively few pressures, which makes it interesting. It's up to you. It's the fantasy of what's presented about architecture in Los Angeles. Oh, you can go and do anything and everybody will say, fine, you know. I'm not sure that's the strongest context in which to operate. I mean, some of the most unusual work is done under really excruciating limitations. And that too, there's a kind of art form in working around that. In the end, nobody asks what was the pressure, what was the client. I mean, they may ask if it's your girlfriend or your friend or something like. In the end, the building is the building. whatever made it what it is, and we can sit here and talk, there it is. You know, I go away, you go away, everybody goes away, new people come, there's the building. So the building, the story of the building in the end is the building.
What is the limits of contextuality? I mean, is it, as you said, it's not so powerful, the context is not so powerful, but still...
Well, I think...
I'm not referring to a kind of a artificial sense of nationality or something like that, but
right.
the geographical climate and especially cultural references.
I mean, this is an interesting and a very important question, and for all the discussion about globalization.
That's true. I'm not referring to a Chinese culture, but a kind of a production culture, new commodities. I mean, how things are produced,
yeah.
delivered, and commodified in the new world. I mean, China is representing such kind of a relation pattern right. more than anything else, even more right. than its her own culture.
I'm sorry again we're not in Los Angeles. We're finishing a building now that's called the Pterodactyl. If you look at it, it comes out of the top of a garage.
Yeah, I've seen that.
If you see it, and the building that, even with CATIA, mm-hmm. we had with the best software, we had some mm-hmm. interesting technical problems. And when I listen to what you say about fabrication and new tools, with all of that, it's still been a very tough go. But I think yesterday the client actually moved in, so we did it. It's great. But I think the context question, the idea of how the context influences the discussion, is very different in very different hands. I mean, there are people who will explain and justify architecture based on the view is here, the door is here, the wind is here, the highway is there, acoustics,
functional diagram, flow diagrams.
Right, operationally, and nobody, and those are more what I would call, not banal, but prosaic kinds of questions, but they're questions. So the issue for me would be, those answers are part of the story, but they're never an adequate explanation for the content of a project.
And not the essential question.
It's really not. So it has more to do with how those concerns or issues are integrated in a broader kind of dialectic. I mean, I would call it a dialectic because I'm interested in oppositions in a project. I'm not so interested in a homogenized rendition of this is the world. I'm more interested in representing something. It might be this, and it might be that. But these are words. And then somehow the poetry of the experience could be homogenized, even though a poem might have antithetical components in it. So I think you can't make a building that's an observatory to look at Mars and Jupiter and Sirius if you can't see what you're looking for.
That's right.
So, you know, if we couldn't get up the elevator to do this discussion, so we'd have to do it on the sidewalk, which might be better. So operationally, those components in a building need to be done intelligently. They need to be done efficiently. But if they're just a replication of that solution to those problems that exist in a million other situations, then you haven't moved the discussion in a way that you could see it differently and understand it differently. It reminds me, there's a stair in a dormitory that Jim Sterling did in Oxford. Mm-hmm. And I remember going, this is Oxford, it's a 600-700 years mm-hmm. old university, mm-hmm. and Christopher Wren and all these characters. Quadrangles. Then he makes a quadrangle. It's a stair, it's an exit stair, that's all it is. Everybody has exit stairs, so the fire department won't give you a building permit. And it winds around on itself, and it leans out, and you look down into the river, it's really a remarkable, it's a vignette, an experience. I mean, hell, you could knock the whole building down and just keep the exit stair, and it would be fascinating. So what I'm saying is every piece, it's a prosaic piece. It's an exit stair. And yet it was never dealt with. And guess what? It allows you to exit.
That's true.
But, you put one foot in it and you get there. But it has, in a way, everything to do with that, and in another way, nothing to do with that. And this is what I'm talking about. This would be a way of solving what it is and producing what it isn't in the process of doing what you need to do to make it what it needs to be.
That's true. But what it needs to be is, I think, differs with respect to the context and the project and the scale. For example, coming back to the garage project that has been recently completed in LA, it gives me the feeling that it is a more geometrical and artistic based trial to, express a kind of a tectonic expression, the most dominant part of the project, rather than, philosophical and social issues, etc., etc. So it is a kind of a it's a more artistic expression. But when you come back to China, you are talking with the realities and the facts and everything, where the reference point is quite different. So the process differs, I think. While you are working on the garage project, you are referring to the computer program CATIA and its possibilities, the geometries, how to cut the forms and etc. In building scale. The other one is a kind of a urban fabric which controls all the relations and redefines them.
The scales of the two are quite different. But it's useful to me to listen to your description. And when you come to LA, we walk through the the pterodactyl, that it's artistic, or that it's geometric, or that it's a technical expression somehow of capacity. And I think all of those things, all of those ways of explaining it are valid, have an aspect of validity. When you look at it overall as a thing, as a series of shapes in a space, in a particular grouping of buildings, I think to me it has a slightly different meaning of an effort to reconcile obstacles or differences that don't quite get reconciled and do. It is both contradictory and unified. And I think that's an experience with me in my own life, which in different ways some people might share or put it in different words, that nothing ever quite fits. Mm-hmm. Nothing ever quite works. And you invent ways tentatively or temporarily of knitting your life together. That's and right. Giving it a kind of story. This is my story. But when we talk about it somehow, it's not that your life has a story apart from you. So what's interesting is the relationship of the story and the storyteller. That's true, you know? Yeah. Now there are people who think, well, there are facts somehow, or there is a narrative. But I don't think that's true. So this is my narrative, and you would have your narrative. And I think the obstacles to homogeneity are real. Now there's a different argument. I remember a few years ago having a debate with a guy who runs an American school called Yale. And I was talking about some of these things, and he said to me, his name is Stern, and he said to me, okay, why should architecture, I understand what you're saying, why should architecture be about that? Why should it be? why shouldn't it be everybody is smiling and holding hands and kissing goodnight and the sun is coming up and going down? Make everybody happy. So I make everybody happy. And I guess in the end, those differences are because maybe this is what makes me happy, but trying to find in architecture and working with people and for people and with my guys a way of developing temporarily a facsimile for a human experience, not only literally the experience of the project, but the experiences of the lives of people who make the project, who sneak their lives into the project because the client doesn't know, in a way, and you don't tell the client.
In this sense, the accidentality of the end product is, the end product is open to become accidental, maybe, in a way.
Right, but you know what's also funny? I remember we were making, years ago, a kind of canopy of bent glass, you know, and everybody said, you can't draw it, you can't bid it, you can't fabricate it, it'll break, it'll fall down, it'll leak, and they'll sue you, you know? And guess what happened? Every one of those things, we were building it originally for the Los Angeles Philharmonic in Los Angeles, and we built it. And to me, it was an example of working through new technical issues in relationship to conceptual issues. And here's the point, and I think this is important to me. When things are done, the time that they're done is for me important in terms of a discussion of architecture. If I did that project today, there's a guy in Shenzhen, there's a guy in Barcelona, there's a guy in Mexico City who can all make that glass. They can make it right now. When we made the glass, you couldn't make the glass. We had to figure out, so the vision of the project as an idea, and the technical implementation of that idea, you have to be able to figure out both of those in a way. And that you don't get to just say, this is an invention. Eric Mendelsohn is making drawings in the trenches of Verdun, you know, in the First World War. These little drawings, they're beautiful little drawings. And then he goes to Potsdam and Einstein Tower and takes a bunch of mud and bricks and kind of throws that. They didn't know how, that's really what interests me, that trying to figure out how to make something like that when you don't know how to make it. So it's both an idea in a conceptual way, and an idea in terms of understanding the technologies or inventing the technologies, moving the technologies. I think both of those are essential at a particular time. That's really where new architecture comes from, both of those.
That's right. You are coming quite frequently to Turkey.
I like
last month you were here.
Yeah.
It's nice to see you here. So I don't know whether you had a chance to walk around and see Istanbul, but how do you find the contemporary architecture in Turkey?
First of all, I have to.
Some architects.
I have. Suha. I mean, to be honest, what I know of Istanbul and this part of the world comes from our friend Suha Khan, and I have to.
Who is listening us now?
A pretty sophisticated guy, even though he claims not to be, about architecture and lots of other things. And he took me to an architect's office a few weeks ago to meet one of his friends. And what interested me was the design of a project which I understand is a controversial project, because we had a brief discussion of the architecture of mosques, you know? So this architect made a mosque. It was below grade. It did things. It made moves that you would, if you saw it and somebody said this is a house for a client or something, So it's not that the originality comes in a lot of different forms. And it wasn't so much what we saw was unprecedented as a strategy for making buildings in an abstract sense, but to apply it to this kind of building and to build it, it got built, okay? So this is the other thing we didn't say. Idea, technology, get it built. So the guy got it built. So this was great. I think for me, this was, because it started to show a kind of potentially, maybe the dam cracks, and there are a lot of ways, you can see this in the history of cultures, including religious buildings, you know, that in the Christian world, or the Jewish world, or the Buddhist world, or the Hindu, those kinds of building typologies, in a sense, signify how stratified or rigid is the culture overall. And as they start to evolve, maybe this is also a sign that the culture itself is more interpretive, more open, more flexible. I thought this was one of the most interesting things, because you don't hear about that in this culture so much, that certain ideas have a kind of sanctity and they're frozen. And I think the other thing, which is obvious to everybody here, is the cistern, the Roman cistern. And I think Suha took me there a few years ago, and it's a completely fascinating place. And for me, I still use it in lectures, you know, the Medusa sideways, the Medusa upside down. And to me, this was, I really like this. In a sense, this is the Romans attacking the Greeks, using the Greek repertoire, putting it upside down. You're out, we're in, you believe this. You thought this is the capital of a column in your temple? No, it's not anymore. Now it's the base for a water system.
We have the power.
And I think this is a great way for architecture to move, not little by little, but you know, it's great, the cistern. Everybody should see it. It's fantastic.
But when you walk around the streets, what do you see in Istanbul? In terms of contemporary architecture, of course, not the history and the cultural richness.
I think it would be presumptive of me to. Istanbul is a remarkable city. Okay, I don't think, maybe Barcelona, it's a very special. Asia to Europe, Europe to Asia. All this is everybody says, and leaving a piece of its history. So for me, coming from a place like LA, this is completely the opposite of any way of thinking about the world. If you're in Los Angeles, you're working in Los Angeles, you don't really give a damn. And there's nothing to give a damn about. So working, you know, in a world next to Sinan, okay? There's nobody like Sinan anywhere. It's a guy, I don't know how many projects he had, 500. Like what, you know, and so there has to be a kind of historiography, or a kind of, it's not only this way. In different places it could be in a respectful way, not in a copying way, also this way. So there are pressures in Istanbul. Then there's the physiology of the city. The only city I can think of that's anything like it is San Francisco, in terms of bridges and water. Yeah. But San Francisco doesn't do what Istanbul does. It doesn't have the history. It doesn't have Hagia Sophia. It doesn't have cisterns. It doesn't have the Romans and the Suleimans and all of these guys running around for hundreds of years. It really is a kind of urban essence of a city that holds its history and cares about its history and wants somehow, doesn't quite know how, to make a new history. I think it might be one of the greatest places to work. It's not like China, which is, here's a bean field, go make me a city. You know, it's not like LA, which is very horizontal and a lot of room for it. There are pressures of history, and also and pulling backward. So to push forward in a place like Istanbul would be really remarkable. I don't know that anybody has quite succeeded in doing that yet, but I think there's some architects who are trying to do that. And I think that context has to be respected also. And working here wouldn't be just a matter of, this is always a discussion, you know, you come into a city, you come into Barcelona, you come into Vienna, you come into Shanghai, and you do whatever you do and you go away, and it kind of doesn't matter. You do what you do. This is me, I do it here, and it's the same everywhere, but everywhere is different. To actually work in a city like this, with its history, would be a very special opportunity for an architect from outside, I think, and to see how you could move the weight of the history. You know, it's like the Sisyphus story, pushing the stone. So the architect who works in Istanbul has a big stone to push. True, yeah. You know, different than LA.
You have to start in a different position inevitably.
Yeah, I think so.
What about the mainstream architecture? I mean, there is an ongoing, I mean, within the age of media, the repetitive promotion of images and architects and star architects brings a sense of contemporariness, which is kind of different than what we used to have actually, which is updated very shortly, and I mean it is so there is a kind of a mainstream architecture, but it's not easy to read it on the other hand, but I mean everywhere all around the world we see the similar buildings and
so this is a discussion of the changed role of the presentation of architecture as a function of digital media. And I think there are a number of consequences to that. One of which is that architecture books are fewer and fewer. And I know we worked for a number of years with Rizzoli. We still work with them. But the pressures, I was in Rizzoli in New York the other day, and I looked in the lobby waiting for a friend of mine to go out to lunch. And there wasn't a single architecture book in the library, in the whole area where they exhibit. I mean, they had things like Diane Keaton, who is an actress, remodeling buildings in Los Angeles. So one of the issues is that if you value books, whether books are old-fashioned or not, so we could talk about that. There is always a fear that you're not, in general, you're not contemporary enough, you know. But so this is not my fear. But anyway, it certainly has had a consequence to publishing and talking about books in a written form. The other thing that I think has happened is that the availability of work on the internet has turned it into a more glib, superficial styles. That's true. You know, and that a kind of deeper reading of the content of architecture. I have a little boy and a little girl, not so little now, but the boy is, you know, always with the phone. And I was reading a book to him the other day. It's a new book. I don't remember the author. It's called The Shallows. Shallows, not very deep. And it's a discussion, positive and negative, of the strengths of digital communication and various kinds of software, and also what it does to your mind, you know, as opposed to focusing, jumping from one thing to another. So we're talking all of a sudden beep, text, beep, text. And the question is, are we here, or do we belong to what's coming in? Do we belong to what we are, or do we belong to what's coming in? And I think that whole, and by the way, I have to say that the people who are educating the younger people, the older people, were not people who grew up with this. So in a certain sense, the younger people know things and feel things and are learning things that we don't know either. So this is a kind of difficulty with older people making speeches to younger people about how it should be, but the two worlds are a little bit different. So I think, yes, the visibility of architecture is much greater, much more readily accessible, much more a topic of general discourse, not only kind of special in schools of architecture and architecture magazines, which are more and more disappearing.
That's true.
But I also think in terms that we would probably share a closer reading, a deeper examination of some of the issues. Why this and not that? What does this mean? This is what it is. What could it have been? What should it have been? You know, a more probing discussion, analysis, examination of what's being produced in cities and buildings and so on. It seems to me that that's going away, and that you have all kinds of blogs and characters. I mean, I know stuff that comes in to my office and about my office, because there are people who look at that in the office, and we have Twitter and we have Facebook, and although when I look at those things and I'm trying to understand what they mean, Facebook for me seems to be a way of developing one's own, image of oneself. I have to get the right picture of me or something like that. So somebody will think I'm something I'm not, I'm a fat guy, but I should look like a skinny guy or something, but really, I think a lot of the idea of image as opposed to what is making the image. What's the why? It's not so much this is red and this is green, or this is round and this is square, but what those differences mean. And I think this is just the way it is. There are not too many Herbert Mouchamps or Lewis Mumfords cruising around talking now about those kind of issues. Everybody, I know they have something in LA called Curbed LA, which is somewhere between architecture, real estate, fashion, media, so every time you do something, so they write some comment. The person who's writing about it may have borrowed half of what they wrote from 3 other blogs that they never acknowledged. They may know relatively little about it, but somebody says this matters, you better get something down, otherwise you're lost, because you're not ahead of everybody else. They have it, you better say something, all of that. So the
it's
world...
representation of actually contemporary media, yes.
Yeah, and one thing, and I can see it with the kids, somehow it's not only, you don't need to know anything in a way, you just go on Google and Suleiman, Roman cistern. You look it up, you write it down, you turn in a paper, and you forget about it. So what's missing, I think, is the ability of someone who looks at that material to distinguish between what's good or what's intelligent or what's not so good and why. In other words, some ability, even if all of that material is out there and available and entertaining or interesting or what everybody thinks it is, it's not what it says it is. It's something else. And you have to be able to, one has to be able to negotiate it by bringing an outside opinion to the material.
Critical distance.
Yeah. And I think the educational system now and the way people are learning and using the tools, you can say, okay, Google is fantastic. It's really fantastic. I mean, I was trying to give a little key, a piece of jewelry to my daughter just before I left LA. And I was looking for a quote. A quote from Charles Dickens or something. I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember it. So I put in the Charles Dickens key quote or something, and it came back to me. A little key opens a big door. no way in hell would I couldn't do it. So, and Dad wrote it down and put it I gave her a little key, put it in a box, and I'm going to give it to her. And so this is great. So this is not a matter of saying it's neither good nor is it bad intrinsically, but I think it's very important what we bring to it in a critical way. So when you read Curb LA or something, you can tell it's junk and why. You know, so when you see something good, you can recognize it. When you see something that's inadequate, you know that.
But what happens to your architectural education then? Because you are on one side, you are also a kind of you are directly inside the academy and you are teaching and you have lots of students and you are a significant name in terms of architectural education as well. So, I mean, what will happen? What is the curved version?
Well, you and I can't control everything that will happen, but you and I can influence a direction in particular places in a particular time. And what I do as an involvement in education is very different than what I do in my office in this sense.
That was something I was going to ask actually. Is there a continuity between what we do in the university?
It is a good question because there are schools run by architects, at least in some cases. I mean, the quintessential example would be the Bauhaus, which was an ideological, an aesthetic, a technical, a social perspective, and it was imposed on the students. If you want to be a radical architect, you want to do the next thing or take the next step, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. It's like a checklist of what to do and how to learn if you want to be a certain kind of architect.
And you have a role model who does it in the proper way.
That's exactly right. You have a role model who precedes you, and you see, you follow the example, and you'll get to where you want to get. And my perspective is, in a certain sense, there aren't any role models that you should follow, but there are probably some that you should listen to, but you should listen to in a critical way, which means not only what they put in, yes or no, but what they left out, yes or no, so that what the goal would be to create a mind, an inquisitive mind, which would have enough self-confidence both to appreciate what preceded it and to criticize it and move it in a different place. And if you can create that kind of mind in the part of a student, and it doesn't always work, well, how do you do that? First of all, you say what I just said. You talk about it in that way. You give the student a sense that their job is to do the next job, not to follow the last job. And then you bring people in from around the world, talking, exhibiting, lecturing, teaching, debating, making books, exhibitions, classes, events in architecture. The same way in a few weeks we bring Suha to LA.
Doesn't it have a risk to turn into a curve?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're probably giving those, it's a little blog, they're probably giving them too much credit. But I think if you come to speak in that environment, I think you know the kind of environment you're coming to speak in. It's also an environment that's very used to seeing and hearing from people in architecture who are in one way or another making contributions. And so I think the audience is a little more sophisticated. And the audience is also, I would say, a confident audience. I don't think it's a superficial audience, although looking at different kinds of, I mean, it may be some of what you just said is true in the sense that people could take things and simply reproduce them.
Make their own collage.
Yeah, and that happens. but it's not encouraged to do that. I think it's encouraged to look, to think, to evaluate, to say what works and to say what doesn't.
And coming back to education, what do you suggest?
Well, I think what I said. I think what we want to do is give a student the sense that ideas move, history moves, and in a certain sense you have, as we all do, in different ways, an opportunity to write history. There's a line, we write history and history becomes the history we write. Not history is something over there by somebody else, but history is here and now, and it's us, if we can do it. So that the capacity or the will to move the discussion forward, it won't be every student. Maybe the 500 people in the lecture, maybe 3 will do it.
That's true.
You know, but that it's available as a way of thinking, as opposed to you have to think about architecture in terms of what somebody else thought about architecture. And this is not to denigrate necessarily what somebody else thought. It's just to say that every idea was incomplete, inadequate, and gets to be remodeled. Whether it's Copernicus or Galileo or Darwin or Newton or whoever it is. They don't get to stand up forever and say this is the way it is. It's never like that. Sometimes it moves a little and sometimes it moves a lot. I think we as people tend, Freud said it, Jung said it. So for a long time this was a model. What happened to that? So these things move and you can move it. I think that would be the idea.
That uncertainty and continuous research is an alternative opportunity.
Right.
Yes. Thank you very much for being with us. I think we are just around the time. Would you like to add anything else?
Just that I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to an audience in Istanbul and in Turkey. It's a really remarkable world for me. I wouldn't claim in any way to understand it, but I'm fascinated by it, and more Americans should come to understand that and appreciate it and learn from it, and also find a way to be in that discussion. It's an important place, and what you're doing in these discussions, I think, is helpful in that direction. So thank you very much.
We thank you. I mean, it was really a pleasure to be with you within this series. I'm going to give the link.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.